Ken Medema began playing the piano at the age of 5, and then began formal piano lessons at the age of 8. Early on, he learned to improvise. He had a teacher that said, now you played in this style, so therefore you can improvise in this style. And as you'll see today, he does that so beautifully in so many different ways. Ken has music degrees, both a bachelor and a master's degree in music therapy from Michigan State University. And he worked as a music therapist for a number of years before he began a professional career in 1973. He formed Briar Patch Music Publishing Company in 1985. The interesting thing about Briar Patch Music is that it's called Briar Patch because Brer Rabbit says you live in a place that's not comfortable for others. And that is so much a part of what Ken's music embodies. Ken has been married to Jane since 1965, and they are the parents of Aaron and Rachel, and they have 2 grandchildren, Charlotte and Henry. Ken travels widely and broadly, and he travels with a lovely, lovely person, Beverly Vandermolen, who is right here. And Beverly is delightful, and I hope you'll get a chance to meet her and to speak with her today as well. It would be hard for me to imagine my life's soundtrack without the music of Ken Medema. A couple of nights ago, we were YouTubing Ken Medema things, and I kept saying, oh my gosh, I haven't thought of that one in a while. And all of these Ken Medema songs were just playing back. To prove that to you, I brought with you my copy of I Saw You that I bought when it was brand new, and it is now completely fallen apart, but I put it together quite nicely. So I've sung all of these songs and love them dearly. Ken, thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you at Baylor, and we're so glad that you are here as Hearn Innovator. So let's welcome Ken Medema.
Better to start with music, and so that's what I would like to do. Music first, talk later. Is there a place for dreaming in the corners of your mind, in a world where dreams are broken down, dreamers hard to find? And do you dream, and do you weep sometimes about the way that things should be? Oh yes, come dreaming with me, admission is free. play this afternoon with this topic. It's a new dance for the church musician. And we start this way. The year was 1976. I was invited to be the guest soloist on Missions Sunday at a huge Presbyterian church in the southeastern part of our country, which I will not name lest some of you have friends there. We'll just call it the Frigidaire Presbyterian Church, for lack of a better title. Now, Missions Sunday was the biggest thing going at Frigidaire. It was bigger than Christmas and Easter combined. They raised trillions of dollars for missions on Missions Sunday, and it was a big, high, holy day. So, knowing that it was a very formal church, I decided I should write something properly Frigidarian to sing at Mission Sunday. And so, before I ever got there, I wrote this. Let all the music ring, let all the people sing, from every corner of the earth, proclaim the gospel of new birth, let all the music ring. And that is what I thoroughly intended to sing that Sunday until everything changed. It was the Saturday before that Sunday I had gotten into town early and discovered that the youth of the church, 100 of them strong, were going to have a party in my honor. Knowing that I had gone to high school in the late 50s, early 60s, they decided to make it a sock hop with all of my favorite songs. I had a girl, Donna was her name, she was. And you know, dream, 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 help me, dream, 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 I want you and I want you in the night, I need you and I need you to hold me tight, to hold me tight whenever I want you, all I have to do is dream. Let's get back to the good part. I can make you mine, taste your lips of what? Grape juice. Grape juice in the back. Southern mansion, and they brought in a jukebox from 1959 with all of my favorite songs on it. There were 100 kids. Now, mind you, I grew up in a non-dancing church. I went to a non-dancing Christian school. We didn't even have a prom. We had a banquet in the basement of the Dutch Reformed Church. How exciting is that? Isn't that just the thing you want to take your girl to? Hey, I want you to come with me to the banquet in the basement of the Dutch Reformed Church, right? So I walk into this gorgeous southern mansion. The jukebox is playing Elvis Presley full blast, and there are 100 kids, and they're all yeah. And all of a sudden, I am back in high school, the geek who couldn't, the dork who didn't. All of my friends would sneak off to public schools and dance, but not me. No siree. So I walk in, half the evening I spent against the wall pretending to watch the evening go by. Along about halfway through the evening, a young girl comes and says, "Mister, would you dance with me?" Now, parenthesis, she is not one of the cool kids. No, not one of the popular kids. No, this is Miss Unpopularity. And I'll tell you, you'll understand when I say this was a Saks Fifth Avenue church. And she and her family shopped at Goodwill. Are you with me? You know whereof I speak? Okay. So she said, "Mister, would you dance with me?" I said, "No, I can't. I don't dance." I told her about the non-dancing church. I told her about the non-dancing, non-prom having Christian school. And I said, "But you know what? I'm doing a little bit better because now that I have a career and a little bit of extra money, I'm taking dance lessons." And I learned my first step. Now I can do T for two, and two for T, me for you, and you. She said, oh, you'll dance with me then. I said, no, please don't ask me to. And she said, oh, come on, dance with me. And they all said, make him dance, make him dance, make him dance. So she drags me out on the floor, kicking and screaming, I can't do this. I stepped on her feet, I stepped on my feet. I knocked over 5 kids, 2 lamps, and 1 statue. But I had a wonderful time. And I got back to my hotel room. And I couldn't sleep. There I was in my room on the 2nd floor of this hotel going, well, you could knock me down, step in my face, slam upon me, all over the place, please. Lay off my blue suede shoes. Now, I don't know what the people downstairs thought, but I was having a really, really good time. And I knew exactly at that moment how Liza Doolittle must have felt on that amazing night. You can help me if you know it. I could have danced all night. Come on. I could have danced all night and still have been for more. I was spread my wings and done 1,000 things I'd never done before. I'll never know what made it so exciting. Why, all at once, my heart began to sing. I only know when he began to dance with me. I could have danced, danced. Oh, so I did what I always do when I can't sleep. I wrote a
Song.
Of course. And decided I liked it so much that I would sing it at Frigidaire the next day. So we arrive at the Holy of Holies just in time to hear the last few notes of the organ prelude. That's what happened when the kids come out. And so the congregation is all ready for let all the music ring. That's not what they heard. What they heard sounded more or less like this. She asked me to dance, and I'd never tried dancing before. Minister, what is he doing up there? I had visions of everyone laughing me right off the floor. Music director, take the guy's mic away. No, I protested. It just wouldn't be any good. She gently insisted, and finally I told her I would. Well, it was unforgettable. It was unforgettable. Here was the coming of spring on my cold winter's day. Unforgettable. He taught the singer to sing in a whole new way. The coming of spring on a cold winter's day taught me to sing in a brand new way. It's perhaps a new dance for the church musician. I grew up in a church where there was a very definite separation between the music that was church music and the music that was secular music, and never the twain would meet. I did not study church music in college. I studied music therapy. I was always interested, mind you, in the music of the church. In fact, when I came back to faith after having run away all through high school, came back to faith because at Michigan State I met a Baptist preacher's daughter. And she was a music student, and we had the same piano teacher. And she was a person whose piano playing I respected very, very highly. I loved the way she played the piano. And I loved her, I loved the broad interest that she had in all kinds of music. A little story about that. I was in a practice room working. Now, you have to know that at Michigan State in 1962 or 3, no one really dared to do anything in a practice room that wasn't sort of something appropriate to be played in the music department. You didn't do pop songs or Broadway songs. You didn't want to waste a piano. You didn't abuse a practice room by doing something like that. So I was surreptitiously trying to work on a pop arrangement. And Jane, this girl I had met, walked in and she said, "What are you working on?" And I thought, oh dear, I'm going to get in trouble. I said, "I'm working on an arrangement of When I Fall in Love." She said, "Play it for me." I thought, this could be interesting. So I did. I played her the arrangement of When I Fall in Love. She told me she hated me because I made her cry, and that was how our courtship began. But right off the bat, what interested me is that here was a music student who was fascinated with jazz and pop music and Broadway and listening to all kinds of things. We spent hours and hours listening to Nina Simone records. Back then we spent hours and hours listening to Beatles records. And she was the first person that I had met in the department. Things are so changed now. She was the first person who dared to dance this new dance with me, who dared to explore my other musical interests. And that was what began for us an interesting journey toward all kinds of world music and new music textures. And that is the background from which I come to this afternoon to say that perhaps there has to be a new dance for those of us who are in the field of church music. Still, there seems to be this dichotomy between what is church music and what is not church music. You don't hear Bruce Springsteen tunes on a Sunday morning. You don't hear many Beatles tunes. Once in a while, in a really progressive, crazy place, you hear a pop tune on a Sunday morning. Once in a while, if Ken Medema comes to your church during communion, you'll hear "Everybody's Got a Hungry Heart." And it's amazing how well it works. A little story, the year was 1973, And it was a huge conference that was put on by the Word Book people. Word Book and Word Travel people. The conference was called Meaning and Belonging, New Directions in the Church. And it was, the conference was led by people who were at that time some of the heavies in relational theology. Lloyd Ogilvie was there, Keith Miller was there, Bruce Larson was there, Lyman Coleman was there, Carlisle Marney was there. I mean, it was a who's who in ecclesiastical, at least in Protestant and evangelical circles. Now, the last day we were to have communion. And I was the pianist for the conference, and there were about 4,000 Christian leaders there from all stripes. And Robert Raines was the person who was moderating, and he was the person who would be helping us with communion. At the last moment, before the elements were passed, Robert leaned over to me, down off the edge of the platform, and said, "I forgot to ask you to play during the communion. Play something." I had no clue why a person who's been steeped in hymnology, steeped in church music, played church music for years and years and years, had no clue as to what to do. I don't know. But my mind was a blank. And the only thing, and believe me, the only thing I could think of was this. Oh, we ain't got a barrel of wine. Maybe we're ragged and funny, but we'll travel along, singing a song, side by side. Oh, we don't know what's coming tomorrow. Here we go. We don't know what's coming tomorrow. Maybe it's trouble and sorrow. Maybe it's trouble and sorrow. Travel along, singing a song, side by side. Through all kinds of weather. Here we go. Through all kinds of weather, the sky should fall. One in the sky, all of us work together. Long as we're together, it doesn't matter. We've all had the worlds and parted. We've all had the worlds and parted. We'll be the same as we started. We'll be the same as we started. Just to travel along, sing a song, side by side. Sing it again, side by side. One more time, side by side. Well, as we kept on singing, what we discovered was that every single phrase of this song was absolutely cram jam full of gospel. Think of it. We ain't got a barrel of money. Don't worry about what you'll eat, what you'll drink, or what you'll put on. The Gentiles worry about all these things. Maybe we're ragged and funny. Talk about fools for Christ. Hello. We'll travel along singing a song. Oh, we don't know what's coming tomorrow? Don't worry about tomorrow. Sufficient unto the day is the evil thereof. Maybe it's trouble and sorrow. 1,000 shall fall at your left hand, 10,000 at your right hand. Through all kinds of weather, what if the sky should fall? How many texts do we have about God sheltering us when all things are falling apart around us? And you go through the song and you realize every phrase is crammed full of good news, depending on how you interpret it. That was one of the most meaningful moments that I can remember in my musical world. So things like that have convinced me that the dichotomy, the division that we have made for so long between what is secular and what is sacred, perhaps needs to be reimagined. Now, in the classical world, actually, they've done better about it. We don't get so bent out of shape when an oboist plays a movement of a Bach, a Vivaldi oboe concerto, or when a horn player plays a movement from the Mozart horn concerto. That sort of is acceptable. But other than that, in what we sing, we make this dichotomy, don't we? And perhaps it's time for us to rethink that. Perhaps it's time for us to reimagine what it means to be a musician in and with the Christian community. Maybe we should stop talking about church music. Maybe we should start talking about good news music. Or maybe we should start talking about Christian and culture music. Or maybe we should start talking in some other way than using the terms we've always used. Maybe it's time to rethink that. Maybe it's time to rethink what we do when we gather with music. What do we do with music? What is happening when we gather together as a community? What are we doing? We use these terms that we've known for so long. We use the term worship service. Do we even know what a worship service is? What the service of worship is? Have we even thought about theologically what that means? I think most of us haven't. Some of you who are studying these things have. But for most of us, we don't know. We simply call it a worship service because that's what we've always called it. What if we called it a gathering? And what if we said the purpose of the gathering is so that the redeemed can gather? What do we want to do during this gathering? What do we want to happen? Well, maybe we can say we want to have a conversation with our culture, with ourselves, with our God, with our world. And with each other, maybe we want to have a conversation. Maybe we want to learn what it means to be disciples. Maybe we want to learn what it means to impact our culture. Maybe we want to find a common ground between this gathering and the culture in which we live. Maybe we want to find where the community of believers and the culture intersect and come together. Maybe we want to find a way that we can serve, in the best way, serve the culture. In 1980, I moved to California to join a little church, a tiny church, maybe 40 or 50 people. But one of the things this church did was that they had a very live, very active music theater group. And about every month, we presented something in a local park. We had no intention of trying to, sort of convert folks. We had no intention of hauling people into the church. We simply wanted to present something from Broadway, or maybe a folk music review, or maybe it was a program of English folk songs. Maybe it was a program of mountain ballads from Kentucky. But we wanted to present something in the park where we would be seen as serving our city, as loving our city, as reaching out to our city. And it was a very exciting thing to watch people who came and were transformed by this. There's a church in San Francisco called Noe Valley Ministries who believes that one of their tasks in loving the community is to bring in concerts, all kinds of concerts, and in that way try to impact the culture, bring the culture into our space. But there are so many other ways of doing it, so many other ways in which we, as musicians who are committed to the good news, perhaps can visit and work within and serve our culture. When I was growing up, if you were a church musician, you never thought about playing in clubs. You wouldn't play in a bar, ever, ever, ever. Why not? I remember very clearly the little church in East Lansing where I was a minister of music during my graduate days, and we were going to do a World Hunger Sunday. And I engaged a singer from one of the local clubs who came to church in her Saturday night sing in the club garb and sang, "Buddy, can you spare a dime?" And it was, our whole congregation was transfixed by this experience, because all of a sudden the culture and the church met. We found some ground where we could walk together. We danced in the crossroads, if you will. We took hands, former strangers, at least for this one moment, taking hands, becoming at least temporary acquaintances. So there's that whole business of impacting our culture, getting out of the four walls of our sanctuary and finding a place in the real world, in the culture around us, finding ways to do a musical thing that touches the culture. People are crazy for music. Music is everywhere. I mean, on their iPods, in their iPhones, people have earbuds on all around us because music is so vital to people. They need it, they want it. So why then should we not find ways to make our music something that others in the culture can connect with, and to bring into our communities music that has heretofore been regarded as not sacred? Find places where the church and the culture meet. We go beyond the walls. We get out into the street. We find those meeting places. Another thing I think that's part of this whole new dance is this business of becoming, as Randall Bradley says it, multi-musical. We need, as church musicians, we need to learn some new languages. Now, most of us who are church musicians do well in one or two musical languages. But I can't tell you the number of churches where I have worked where the person who is the minister of music says, well, I don't do anything with that contemporary thing. We hire somebody else to do that because I just don't know that genre and I'm just not interested. You're not what? You're not interested? I think it becomes imperative for those of us who work in an increasingly diverse Christian community. My word, we have people in our communities now who speak different musical mother tongues, who've grown up with different musical languages. And do we not then give people a chance to worship in a language that's comfortable for them and familiar for them? So, we need to learn many, many new languages, folk languages and pop languages and world music languages, Asian music languages, African music languages. I made a fatal mistake one fine Friday night. I was living in New Jersey and asked to go to a black church to sing at the youth gathering. So I thought, well, black youth, oh boy, I get out all my soul and rock rhythms, and this is going to be a really cool deal. Little did I know, this was an island church, and at the beginning of the youth meeting, the youth choir sang Ave Verum Corpus by Mozart. I retooled very, very quickly. But we need to learn many new languages, and that means we need to be listeners. I ask students all the time, what do you listen to? Well, I listen to a lot of things. Well, tell me specifically what you listen to, and what do you get from what you listen? Well, I just listen to stuff because I like it. That's not enough. I think it becomes imperative that we listen to stuff so that we can learn the media, so that we can learn the intricacies, so that we can learn the factors that make a style what it is, so that we can learn what makes country music what it is, and where country music is moving these days. Well, how new country is different from old country. We need to learn, for example, how dance music is different now from what it was 10, 15 years ago. I'm kind of glad that Lady Gaga is around because she's bringing back 90s dance textures, and that's kind of fun because I like those a lot. We need to know what's happening on the world music fronts, on all these fusion fronts that are taking place. We need to know these things. It's not an easy job, especially when you become older, when you're not a student anymore, because you want to settle into the areas where you're comfortable. I do. We all do. We want to settle into what's easy, what's comfortable. And we can't do that. We just can't. We can't make only the same sounds that we made 20 or 30 years ago. We can't use only the same verbiage we used 20 or 30 years ago. A few years ago I was in Colorado and heard a most amazing sermon. The sermon was called, "You Don't Have to Check Your Anger at the Door." And it was about the psalm, I believe it's 137, that begins, "By the waters of Babylon, we hung our harps on the willows, and we wept for thee, Zion." And the preacher said, we're pretty good about doing the, we wept for Zion, we hung our harps on the willows, but we're not really good about what happens when the sound goes, yeah, and I wish, God, that you would just break those little Babylonian babies' heads, bash them to pieces on the rocks. What do we do with that? He said. And then he said, church has got to be a place where you don't check your anger at the door. Church has got to be a place where anger can be brought here and then transformed. And I looked all throughout my repertoire of hymns. There was no hymn for after the service. After the sermon. There was no hymn about not having to check your anger at the door. There was no hymn that even mentioned anger. Was there? Can you think of one? I couldn't. And so it occurs to me that there are whole dimensions of life. Now, there's a lot of quote secular music that mentions anger, that even talks about reconciliation and forgiveness, that talks about having to get over anger, having to deal with anger. But I couldn't find anything in the wonderful church repertoire, because our field of interest has been so limited. So I think it's time to expand. And people ask, well, how do we do that? Our congregations will rebel. No, they won't. If we take our time, if we're gentle, if we're slow, if we're not in a hurry, if our preachers will help us by talking about these things, by helping us clarify new visions for our church, new visions for a missional church that finds itself living in the culture and living around the culture and ministering to the culture and loving the community. If we do that gently, carefully, I don't think people will resist. I think people will be excited. I think people will see a new vision. And those of us who are in music need to be a part of that new vision. Everybody knows that mainline churches are dying. Everybody knows that so many of the churches that attracted 1,000, 1,200, 1,300 people are now down to 50 and 40. Everybody knows all that's changing. And there's a longing, a restlessness to find something new, to find a new vision. And perhaps it's time for some of these old institutions that are so, as Len Sweet calls it, land-based. They're like these big towers that we build, establishments that we think will last forever. Perhaps it's time for some of those old land-based institutions and formats to see an end. Maybe we need to be, as Len Sweet calls it, the aqua church, the church that can swim. Wow. The church that can ride the waves. The church that knows how to live without a big castle to live in. The church that knows how to live on the water. The church that knows how to sing the water music floating on the boat down the river. The church that knows how to survive and to thrive when all you've got is people swimming on the waves, moving with the culture. Now, that doesn't mean we give in to all aspects of the culture, but it does mean that we live in this world, in the real world, where things are mobile and changing and transitory. And in the best ways, we need to be mobile and changing and transitory as well. Somebody said, well, what do you do about a corporate legacy of music? I think what you do is you realize that things will change over the moments. And we may come back to a land-based tower-building culture. Maybe. Maybe if some of the futurists that I read are right, and maybe after the great cataclysm where the electricity goes off and all our computers die, we'll have to go back to that world. But right now, we don't live there. And the church can't afford to live there either. So, in many ways, I think there is a new dance for those of us who are in church music. It's calling us to be outside the walls. It's calling us to a new vision of what happens inside the gathering. Rather than it being a place where people sit and listen primarily and sing a little bit, I think it's a place where stories are told, where there's a great deal more interaction, where we as musicians need to give up our domain, as it were, and let people into that domain, ask them what music means to them, ask them how music touches their lives, let them tell us their stories, let them in on our planning, our imagining of what happens in the gathering, so that we become people who facilitate a multilingual, mobile, broadening, expanding community of believers who are learning how to touch and be touched by, to love and be loved by, to engage and be engaged by the culture in which we live, whatever that culture may be, changing every day, changing all the time. It's a new dance for us. or whatever you want to say that comments to or adds to or plays with some of the concepts that I've been trying to express. I'm not a speaker, I'm a singer, I'm a musician, so when it comes to the talking part, that's not the most comfortable part for me. But so what things, and don't raise your hand, it won't do a bit of good. But what things would you, what comments would you make about what we're playing with here this afternoon? I hear the wheels turning. I know this.
Well, it makes me feel good because you have spoken what I have believed, but I've never heard anyone else say it.
Thank you. I'm glad for that, because I think I hear all the time people say, you know, our older people will not like this. And I don't think that's true. I think
How did you know I was old?
But, you know, well, we'll talk about that later. But a lot of folks a lot of people are afraid that elements of our congregations won't like these new ideas, and I really, really don't believe that's true. I think people are longing for these things to be said. Gently, yes. Carefully, yes. Slowly, yes. Not foisted upon us like some imported program from someplace else just because Joel does it in Houston, we have to do it, or just because you know David Crowder's well known, that means we have to bring no. But finding our own spot, our own place, our own way of being new, I think is so important, and I think people are longing for it. Thanks for that commendation. Others, comments?
I've been waiting for you to do something with Lord of the Dance.
For what?
Lord of the Dance.
Oh, that became a very significant song for me because of my interest in dancing, because I never could dance, and so it always seemed like such a wonderful, wonderful metaphor, and I'm obsessed with the idea of dancing, and I can't do it, so I don't know. But other comments?
Ken, are you really saying that perhaps at Columbus Avenue Baptist Church on Sunday for the offertory, you could just sing a Tom Petty tune straight up?
I really believe that. And I believe that people have to be ready for it. I believe that you don't do these things without making people aware. I think, for example, you need to take some time to say to Columbus Avenue, we're really wanting to intersect with our culture. We're really wanting to break down what has been this dichotomy between sacred and secular. You all who are members of this church, you know that there are songs that you know and love because they speak to you, they touch your heart on a real live basis. And this is exactly what we want to do here on Sunday. And if you give people time to digest that idea, give people time to work with it and get accustomed to it, I think they will respond well. And I think especially when you connect the music with story, a Tom Petty tune will work a lot more effectively if there's a story told about it. What does this song mean to me? How did so-and-so come to love this song? What did it mean in so-and-so's life? What factors in my life were impacted by this song? How did it touch me? If that story becomes a part of what we do, then the song will have a lot easier access into our hearts, I think.
How do you go about addressing the closed-minded nature of people? In my experience, it's not always the old people that they're made out to think that they're the closed-minded ones, but really the young people tend to think that worship has to be a certain way. How do you go about addressing that?
Well, first of all, I think you have to make the assumption that people are not willingly closed-minded. I think you make the assumption that if people are, as we say, closed-minded, there are reasons behind it. There's a longing behind it. There's a heartbeat behind that closed-mindedness. Now, that's got something to do, perhaps, with feeling at loose ends in a world that's a little bit too crazy for us. In a world where I don't know what's going on, so I need to find some place that's safe, some place that's predictable, some place where I know what's going to happen, where I know what's going on. And I think we can address those things directly. I think we can say to a church, we tend to be, we tend to close the windows on things that are new because we feel at loose ends. We feel at odds in a world that's too crazy for us. And so we retreat back to things that we know and love. Now, let's see, I say to my people, let's see if we can find a way to both be safe and open some new windows. Randy Frizzy, a wonderful, wonderful pastor and leader who's preached at a church in Dallas for a long time and worked at Willow Creek and now writes. Randy says that if you want to see any changes, find the people who are the opinion makers. Now, that isn't always the elected leadership. Those people who are the opinion makers, those people who are the most vociferous, find them, take them into your confidence, explain to them carefully what you want to do. Trust them to have minds that are thoughtful. If you assume that people are not pig-headed, if you assume that people think, then lay out before them your burden. I, as a musician, feel like we want to try some new things. We want to bring folk into our church who don't usually come here. And perhaps have some people at the ready to give testimony to that. Have some people who are at the ready to say, you know, when we did that thing the other week, it was so wonderful. Have some people who can talk to the opinion makers and trust that the opinion makers are not as close as we think they might be. Give them time. Give them time. Lay your burden before them. Trust them. And if after several months of this, if you've done your best, if you've given folks time to think, to imagine, to re-envision, if you've given them the power to say yes or no, and still it's not working, then I don't know what to tell you. But all I can tell you is, in most situations that I've discovered, when you give people enough time, they will, if they know that you trust them, they will open windows.
Ken, would you be willing to sing Moses and close us out with that? Before you go off from Baylor and we hear you at the end?
Way back there in the wilderness, saw smoke came to the bush, and the bush was burning. God said, take off your shoes, Moses, 'cause you're on holy ground. talks so good. And another thing, how will they know that I've been here with you? How will they know what you've sent me to do? What little Moses had, you know in Egypt, Lord, then what little Moses, you know they'll never hear a single word I say. You better get your dirty work done another way, not me, Lord. What's that in your hand? Just a rod? Well, throw down. Do you mean like on the ground? Don't take this rod away from me. Don't you know it's mine? Only security. Don't you know when you live here all alone, a man's gotta have something that he can call his own. Please, Lord. Throw down, Moses. Throw it down, Moses. Throw it down, Moses. Moses threw the rod on the ground, and the rod became a hissing snake. Moses started running. But you would run, and then I'd run too. He wasn't running from a hot rod, running from a hissing snake. Running scared of what God is going to do. Running scared to get a hold of you. The Lord said, stop. Pick it up, Moses, by the tail. Lord, I have not lived here very long. Lord, I believe the whole thing wrong. Don't you know? You should never pick up a hissing snake like this. Pick it up, Moses. God? It's a rod again? Smoke and bushes. It's a rod!